Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss OpGen Inc. My name is Max Colbert, and I'm part of the investor relations team for OpGen. I'll be moderating this webinar today. Before we begin, as a publicly listed company, it is important that investors take note of the forward-looking statements provided at the beginning of the presentation. Please note that all statements, other than statements of historical fact, are statements that can be deemed forward-looking statements. A complete discussion of the risks and uncertainties facing the company appears in the company's filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission and in the company's annual information form dated March 29th, 2021, a copy of which is available on the SEC website at www.sec.gov. I'd also like to note that we are recording today's presentation. With me today from OpGen, we have Oliver Schacht, President and Chief Executive Officer, Timothy Deck, Chief Financial Officer, and Johannes Bacher, Chief Operating Officer. Oliver and Tim will be running through OpGen's recent progress and the current state of the company, after which we'll be hosting a Q&A session. A number of questions were received ahead of today's presentation, which, together with any questions received throughout the call, we will do our best to address in today's 45-minute session. If you would like to submit a question at any point, please do so by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom application. With that being said, I'll hand it over to you, Oliver.
Thanks, Max, and welcome to this business update from OpGen. We'll obviously provide updates on progress that we've made recently towards some of the key milestones that I know everybody is anxiously waiting for. And of course, we'll offer an opportunity to ask questions. For those of you who are new to the OpGen story, let's just quickly revisit who we are and what we do. OpGen is addressing one of mankind's existential threats, and that's the threat of ever-growing antimicrobial resistance. With rapid, easy to use, very broad and smart artificial intelligence-enabled diagnostics that really puts us at the cutting edge in the fight against AMR. Now, I'll remind everybody of the platforms that we strategically prioritized, which we announced part of our business update in fall of 2020. First off, our Univero platform is already FDA cleared, as well as CE marked and approved in other markets. The Acutus AMR gene panel, which is currently pending FDA clearance, and I'll be talking to that later on. The Iris Genetics bioinformatics, next-gen sequencing-based and artificial intelligence-powered, is commercial stage with first service offerings being launched as we speak and multiple strategic partnering opportunities that we're going to be touching upon. And then the global commercial channels where we're going direct, selling to labs and hospitals here in the United States, while we're working with distributors and partners in all other parts of the world. Now, if you look at the markets that OpGen is addressing, there's a large total available market, and we're looking at numbers from the United States and Europe here. 9 million patients each and every year are being hospitalized in the US and Europe for one of these life-threatening infectious diseases. If you look at the average selling price of high-end multiplex molecular diagnostics such as ours, you're typically looking at prices, let's call it $120 to $180 with an average of probably right around $150, makes a total available market opportunity of about $1.5 billion. And again, this is US and Europe only. It excludes China. It excludes Asia Pacific and the rest of the world. Now, if you look at our broad portfolio of differentiated syndromic panels, all of these products are fully developed. These products are clinically validated. 2 of those products for lower respiratory tract infection or pneumonia have already been FDA cleared. All 5 of these products have been CE marked. And we've also received approvals in the Middle East, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and have pending approvals in other jurisdictions. And we'll be talking about the China approval later on in this presentation. There's other pending approvals such as Colombia and Vietnam in other areas where we anticipate growth. Now, the USPs are threefold. We have the broadest panels, highest multiplexing of any platform out there. We have the broadest number of antimicrobial resistance markers. And thirdly, you see a very broad set of native clinical sample types that have been fully clinically validated and are part of our product label claims on this slide. The company has already successfully taken the first ever FDA cleared pneumonia test, or LRT, through a 510K de novo process with the FDA. Even in normal times, that took 18 months from start to finish, even without COVID. Our second LRT-BAL FDA clearance was received in December of 2019. Bringing these first-in-class and best-in-class products through prospective clinical trials, as well as the regulatory process, is something the team has plenty of experience in. Now, why is this important? We anticipate doing this again with the Acutus AMR gene panel for isolates. We anticipate obtaining FDA clearance decision here in due course. More importantly, our products, such as the Univero LRT, consistently and repeatedly show the power of potentially changing the therapeutic course of antibiotics in over half of all patients. There was a webinar publicly available earlier today in which, yet again, a team of clinicians at the University of Louisville have shown that over 50% of all patients could have and should have benefited from a change in the course of antibiotics based on Univero results. Now, switching gear and looking at the Acutus AMR gene panel, it is a first of its kind, first in class product. Once FDA cleared, it would become the broadest yet ever cleared FDA panel for genetic AMR markers. It covers dozens of potential AMR markers across 9 different classes of antibiotics. To be very clear, the FDA timeline that we outlined in our most recent earnings call is fully intact. The FDA had guided towards 120 days from restarting the review, which was the end of January, i.e. at the end of May, to provide all substantive review. The feedback on all of these documents has been received, and as we announced in a recent press release, we have turned it around and put back to the agency a revised 510K summary. Now, the FDA has guided and has reiterated its expectation of completing their review within 210 days from the end of January, which would put it towards the end of August of this year. We've been in very regular, weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, direct interaction with our review team at the FDA, and we're not currently aware of any outstanding or open questions. So the ball is squarely in the court of the FDA, and we anticipate that the FDA will continue to work towards meeting the timeline that it outlined for reaching a final review completion and potential clearance decision here by the end of August. Switching gears and looking at Ars Genetics. In January, Arne Materna joined us. He'd previously been with the likes of QIAGEN, PacBio, as well as Cosmos ID as the new CEO of Ars Genetics. He's mapped out a portfolio strategy, and he's already launched the first commercial services, isolate sequencing services from Ars Genetics over the last couple of weeks. They've already signed up a number of early adopter commercial accounts in different European countries, and they're currently planning for a number of additional commercial launches of services and solutions from Ars Genetics in the coming months. They've already expanded several times the Sandoz partnership, working with the world's #1 pharmaceutical company in generic antibiotics. They're also working on a number of potential strategic partnering and collaboration deals. As people appreciate, I've been doing partnering negotiations in the molecular diagnostic space for 23 years. These negotiations do take time. We will provide specific updates on any deals that could emerge here over the coming months and quarters. But what's very clear, Ars Genetics anticipates expanding its commercial footprint, is currently hiring a strategic business development person in Europe, and is also looking at establishing a commercial footprint here in the United States. Looking at the Acutus project with the New York State Department of Health, that program is proceeding exactly as planned. Since we announced the extension and expansion, there have been a number of strong months with increasing volumes of using the Acutus AMR gene panel and kit sales. It's important to remember that there are 4 laboratories with an affiliated more than 35 hospitals that have been using the Acutus AMR gene panel for isolates as a research use only product for over 2 years now. We've already initiated the dialogue with the New York State Department of Health, talking about the potential expansion into a year 3 and beyond once we reach the end of September, end of the current extension. Our strategic focus commercially will be to convert those accounts that have been using and are very familiar with the Acutus AMR gene panel as an RUO to move them over to an FDA clear kit as we anticipate that clearance decision, as I said earlier here, by the end of August. Now, looking at the commercial model, as mentioned before, OpGen sells directly only in the United States. That's where we have our own sales and marketing team since the business combination with Acutus, and that team is selling to labs and hospitals across the US. In Europe, as well as Asia Pacific and rest of worlds, we use distribution partners. One of the key focus areas is China. The partnership deal with Beijing Clear Bio, our Chinese partner, has been in place for a number of years and has been publicly disclosed in our S4 filing back in February of 2020. We have successfully achieved the approval of the Univero instrument system in China and are currently awaiting the approval of the pneumonia panel as the first ever Univero panel in China. We do, however, at this point, do not have specific timeline visibility as far as the Chinese regulatory body goes. However, we feel that OpGen has responded to all questions received from the NMPA via our partners at Beijing Clear. We've made available all of the data from the US FDA approval trials, from our European studies, as well as a number of international studies led by key opinion leaders around the globe. There has also been a recent peer-reviewed publication of a Chinese clinical study that our partners Beijing Clear had successfully run with one of the largest AAA hospitals, the Sino-Japanese Friendship Hospital in Beijing. And we've certainly recommended they share that information with the Chinese regulators as well. Now, as we look at our financials, I'll hand it over to Tim Deck to walk us through the financial situation. Tim?
Thanks, Oliver. Today, I'm going to touch on 3 or 4 key financial metrics. I'm going to talk about our annual meeting. I'm then going to talk a little bit about our footprint and our employee composition, and then talk about management and the board. In terms of slide 12 that we're looking at now, the first section at the top talks about our pro forma combined revenue. In looking at that revenue, it looks relatively flat during the past 3 years, but the reality is there's a lot of movement within that particular line in terms of the revenue line. The mix is shifting. You can see back in 2019, a large driver of that $6 million was New York State the first year. The second year has been reduced, though the combination of adding Acutus product sales are increasing. So the revenue from the product line is increasing. We did announce that at the end of the fourth quarter of 2020, we were exiting the fish business. So you may see a downtick in 2021 because of that no longer being a product mix. But during the earnings calls, I'll be sure to point this out. And looking at the next section in reported revenue, Q1, as I just mentioned, it was $830,000 compared to $617,000 as a combined company. So again, our revenue is up almost 35%. In terms of revenue guidance, during the fourth quarter earnings call last year, I was hoping to be able to provide revenue guidance going forward. But as Oliver mentioned, in terms of the delay in the FDA, it's just prudent that we do not provide guidance now. We'll provide updates on the earnings call if and when we will provide guidance. I know that's important for people, but at this point in time, it's just really not something that I'm feeling comfortable with until we get past this FDA situation. In terms of our cash position, we've reported a number of times the success that we've had during 2020 and early 2021. We've raised almost $70 million during that time period. We raised $35 million in early to middle of 2020 through really 3 different sources. We had an ATM, we did a PIPE, and we also had warrants exercised from the October 2019 financing. We also did an additional $35 million in February and March of this year. We had a registered direct of 25. We had a warrant exchange and exercise of 9.7 million, or roughly 10 million. I know I've talked before in the earnings call. I think we're very pleased with the restructuring and the deals that we did, bringing in that type of money, issuing warrants at a lesser percentage each time, and bringing those warrants in, or the warrants now sit at 355 and 356. So we consider that a very wise strategic move at the time. In terms of our cash position, we reported at the end of Q1, we had essentially $40 million of cash. We also touched on another metric that's not listed here is our cash burn. We've publicly stated a number of times that our quarterly cash burn is between $5 and $6 million per quarter. In terms of our capital structure, another extremely important metrics for all of us at the company, as well as on the webinar today, we have 38.3 million shares outstanding. I just touched on the warrants. I said 355 and 356. This shows an average exercise price of 340, but that's really due to the fact that we still have some $2 warrants from the October 2019 financing that kind of drags that down a little bit. But the reality is on a fully diluted basis, we're at 49.8 million shares. And just a reminder for anybody that may be new listening to the call, our authorized shares that we can issue are 50 million. So we're bumping up against that, and thus one of the key reasons for proposal 2 in the annual meeting. In terms of the next slide, I'd like to talk about the annual meeting. The annual meeting was June 9th. With the exception of proposal 2, it was a very successful meeting. All votes were approved with very strong support in the 80 to, in some cases, 90%. So we were very pleased with the outcome, though a little surprised at proposal 2. So I'd like to talk about that. Since the 9th of June, both Oliver and I have been on the call with a number of investors. I thought it was very important to reach out to as many people as we could. I think that there was very much interest in a number of people that we spoke to. I had some very enjoyable conversations, and I think from all of the people that I've talked to, they acknowledged that they had voted for the proposal, or they would vote to change that proposal after, maybe 30 minutes on the phone with people. They really saw the purpose of it. So I think it's fair to say that what we learned during these conversations with everybody, the primary concern is dilution. We as management and the board were clearly aware of dilution, and that's why we put in our proposal to go from 50 million shares to 100 million shares. So let's just pause here and talk about that for a second. I've had some people tell me that they were concerned about, you're asking for this proposal, it could be 100% dilution, it's just not right. You guys need to understand the value of money. Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and I certainly understand the value of money and the dilution concept. So I look at this situation, and I'm just going to kind of throw out a hypothetical situation. If we had approval of that proposal 2, that would authorize us to issue up to an additional 50 million shares at some point in time. Well, again, hypothetically, let's just say we have FDA approval in the coming weeks. Really don't know where the stock price will go, but I think we all think it'll go up. Where it'll go, let's just pick a number. Let's just say $10 per share. Well, if we're sitting at $10 per share and I have the ability to sell some shares via the ATM or whatever avenue that we would choose, if I sold 5 million shares, I would raise $50 million at 3% under an ATM. That's pretty good money at that point, rather than standard banking fees. So $50 million, I just touched on our burn rate being between $5 and $6 million. Well, that would give us an additional 2 years of runway by causing 10% dilution to the current shareholders. I would venture to say that most people on this call, if they knew we'd have an additional two years of runway on top of the 40 million we'd have for 10% dilution, I would think everybody would support that across the board. So, I don't want to spend much more time on this. We have adjourned the meeting until the 7th. We're evaluating all of our alternatives, but I would ask you that if you haven't voted, to consider voting for proposal 2. If you voted against proposal 2, I'd ask you to reconsider that, because having shares available can be used for a variety of reasons. We do have a tranche of debt that's coming up in April of next year, and having the dry powder of shares to be able to negotiate versus using any of our cash and shorten our runway would be obviously the wise thing to do. I'll now turn on to the next two slides about the footprint in our global team. You can see on the left side, our footprint is roughly 50,000 square feet. We reduced our footprint in Rockville from 20,000 square feet to 10. It's really a distribution warehouse facility, lab facilities, and our corporate headquarters. By reducing our footprint from 20 to 10, we save essentially $600,000 a year, or $10 million over the 10-year lease. In terms of our footprint in Germany, you can see the next two items, roughly 34,000 square feet. We have our FDA registered FDA, our operations, and our G&A facility that Jan's sitting in today at the call in Holzgerlingen. And we have a 17,000 square foot FDA registered manufacturing facility in southern Germany. I will pause for a second and remind everybody that, you know, bringing the two companies together in April of last year, that registered, you know, they've invested between 8 and 10 million euros in that manufacturing facility, something that we did not have as OpGen standalone. So that's a significant asset that we have that's in place, ready to go, fully robotic when we do get FDA approval and commercialization going forward. And then we have roughly 7,000 squared in Vienna that houses our bioinformatics and NGS lab facilities. In terms of our global team, it's a very modest team at 110 employees, of which 70% of those, as you can see on the left and the top, represent the bulk of the organization in terms of R&D, operations, bioinformatics, QA, manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. We are proud of our sales and marketing team. That's mostly come from the combination. There are 18 people there. We consider that extremely important as we receive FDA approval and look to really ramp and commercialize almost immediately. And then on the other side, bottom right, we have 15 people in G&A, which represents finance, HR, very small in the sense of a public companies. So that's the team, that's the facility. And I will conclude my remarks by talking about both the leadership team and the board members. Well, you obviously know Oliver and I from all of the earnings calls, and today, Jan, who's joined us and will be answering a number of Q&A items going forward. He is one of the founders of Acutus. He is based in Germany, and he is responsible for the global R&D and operational teams, which, as I just mentioned, is really the bulk of the organization. In terms of the board members, Bill Rhodes, he was with Acutus. He was on the supervisory board since its IPO in 2015. He joined and continued on as chairman of OpGen at the merger in April of 2020. He has 30 plus years of experience in healthcare, 14 years at BD, as well as several other large organizations where he served in senior roles. Mario Cravado, he is likewise with the Acutus board since 2015, very extensive financial background. He helped take a company public on NASDAQ in 2007 and has had significant financial roles throughout his career. Don Elsey, he was with the OpGen board at the time of the merger. He stayed on. He's chairman of the audit. He's chairman of our audit committee. He has likewise served many U.S. publicly traded companies as the CFO. Prabha Fernandez, she has 40 plus years of experience in pharmaceuticals. She's been with Bristol Myers, Abbott, as well as several other large organizations, highly respected, tremendous board member in terms of variety of output. And Oliver, I think we all know. So that's my remarks. I appreciate the time, and I'll turn it back to Oliver.
Thanks, Tim. Now, as Tim said, we've certainly seen a lot of progress over this past year, raising 70 million, receiving China approval for the Univero system, presenting some outstanding clinical data. The latest of that came, just an hour before this call in another webinar. And we've progressed significantly towards the home stretch for the FDA clearance. Now, there are several key catalysts and milestones upcoming that we're really excited about. The FDA clearance decision, as I outlined here, anticipated FDA completion of their review by the end of August. China approval, although timing unclear, major milestone with the pneumonia cartridge approval because that'll trigger the commercial launch. Authorise Genetics, with a number of product and service launches coming up, as well as potential strategic partnering opportunities. The A30 platform, which is the faster, smaller, and cheaper Univero next generation system, another key development milestone here over the summer, with an anticipated series of instruments becoming available for final verification validation testing, again, as well as potential strategic partnering. And then, of course, we will continue strategic licensing and partnering conversations at the level of Authorise Genetics, and we'll make those announcements as soon as they're ready to go. But it's also got to be clear that we've got to do the right strategic deal at the right time for the right set of economics and strategic value for OpGen, as well as our shareholders. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Thanks, Oliver and Tim. We'll now move on to the Q&A session. We have a number of questions received via email we'll be running through, in addition to a few that have come throughout Oliver's presentation. As a reminder, if you would like to submit a question, please do so via the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom application. I'll be reading each question aloud and then handing the line over to Oliver, Tim, and Jan to address the questions. Our first question is, any update on the Acutus AMR gene panel 510K submissions?
Well, further to what I said on this webinar, as well as our Q1 earnings call, look, the FDA has come back with a very specific timeline. And thus far, the FDA has adhered to its timeline every step of the way. They've provided their written feedback on all key documents within 120 days of reinitiating the review. That was at the end of May. That feedback had included all key documents, such as the intended use statements, the instructions for use, or really the package insert, electronic user guide, the OpGen Qualified Q1 Studio 5 user manual. And following specific requests by the agency, we have provided them with a revised and updated 510K summary, which already reflects all of the changes the FDA had made to all of those documents. Now that all of this is behind us, it should frankly simply be a matter of the FDA walking through the motions. We're not aware of any additional or remaining open questions. The FDA has guided and has reiterated their expectation of completing their review by the end of 210 days from January 29th. That would put it at the end of August. And so we do anticipate an FDA clearance decision by then. Of course, potentially that could also come sooner than that.
Thanks, Ollie. To provide more color on how quickly you could commercially launch after approval, as a follow-up, what is your projected revenue from this panel for the first full year after launch?
Sure. As stated on previous earnings calls, I'm happy to reiterate that we've already manufactured several batches of final product that's simply waiting to be labeled with a final FDA cleared label. We should be able to start shipping product within just a few weeks upon finalization of required documentation. But the customer outreach, discussions with potential early adopter accounts have already begun and can be intensified based on the final label claims effectively immediately upon FDA clearance. Just to reiterate, there are a number of large hospital networks such as Northwell, NYU, Mount Sinai, as well as the Wadsworth Center in New York State under the Department of Health project that have been using the Acutus AMR gene panel for isolates as a research use only kit for over 2 years now. There are over 30 affiliated hospitals as part of that program, and we have leads across the United States who have indicated that they're willing and ready to engage with us for specific discussions about bringing this in potentially once the FDA clearance is there and the final set of label claims are clear. We're not at this point providing specific revenue guidance, but the way to think about this launch, frankly, any commercial launch in the molecular diagnostics platform space, is that we're targeting large academic centers in the United States, of which there are several hundred. You'll likely see a wide variety of annual testing volumes that may be as low as a couple of hundred a year and could be in excess of 1,000 tests a year. Given our initial list price of $175, as well as typical anticipated volume-based discounting, a commercial model that relies on reagent rental of the instruments, you could anticipate annual annuities per platform placement that are probably, once gone into final clinical and commercial routine, somewhere in the $50,000 to $150,000 US per system per year.
Thank you for that. And are there any changes in your expected timelines for the clinical trials for the Univero UTI and IJA products?
Well, let me take that one. And no, there aren't any changes, and I'm pleased to confirm that we're fully on track with both programs. So for the Univero UTI, urinary tract infection application, that is, we're expecting to go into a prospective multi-center clinical trial in the third quarter this year. And the IJI clinical trial start likely to follow late in the fourth quarter as well. For the UTI trial sites, we have already identified candidates, and we're currently in protocol discussions with those sites to make sure that the protocol follows our needs here. We have also scheduled slots for manufacturing of the initial UTI cartridge lots, so we have the materials ready when we need them for the actual clinical trial start.
Thank you, Jan. And for the Univero A30RQ platform, you expected a series of 10 instrument systems for final verification and validation testing by mid-2021. What is the update there?
Yeah, well, that's still the case. And well, that's despite an overheating semiconductor market with chip shortages and long delivery times that we're seeing right now. But the development team, I think, still expects that we will meet this key development milestone very soon indeed. So as Ollie said, this summer. And with that, I'd simply say we're fully on track. We're currently seeing the final parts for the instrument being delivered to our instrument development partner. Assembly of the instruments is well underway, and we have already started testing functionality of sub-modules as they become available. So fully on track. And in parallel, and then that's not so much the R&D side, but we're also continuing our conversations with several strategic or potential strategic partners that have expressed an interest in the platform. And we can also say that we have recently seen additional inbound interest for the platform from another large player. And then adding to that, I think a bit of news here is that we're also making great progress with some super fast PCR test protocols. And we're confident that we will be able to achieve turnaround times that could even be well below 30 minutes from sample to answer, depending on sample type and assay. So overall, Univero A30 is expected to be ready for prime time soon. And that's more work on the R&D internal V&V testing in the second half this year, as well as being ready for prime time for potential strategic partnering and license deal making.
Thank you for that, Jan. And regarding the Chinese NMPA, when can we expect the cartridge approval to come through? And as an addition, what does your communication with BCB look like? And are they prepared for a swift commercial launch? What revenue generation can we expect in the first year?
Well, as Ollie has already stated before, the Chinese NMPA does not provide any clear timelines, does not commit to any timing here. So we can only, well, we can't really speculate at this point in time on what any final review or approval timelines would look like. What we recently have done is we have provided another quite extensive ancillary data package to our partner, Beijing Clear Bio, and their regulatory advisors for their submission to the NMPA. But if we use that as an example, what we saw with our instrument submission, we had several rounds of Q&A back and forth with the NMPA before they went radio silent in the fourth quarter last year. And then suddenly out of the blue in the first quarter, they sent across the registration certificate as evidence of the approval of these three instruments. And note that our partner BCB already has about a dozen Univero systems, which they had bought earlier. And they have run several clinical evaluations at large hospital sites in China, one of them being the Sino-Japanese Friendship Hospital in Beijing. And that hospital has recently published a paper, peer-reviewed scientific article in the European Journal of Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. And we have simply encouraged them to also share that publication with the Chinese NMPA, because it's pretty good to underscore and show that they have independently and in a Chinese clinical setting generated data, basically complementing what we had prepared and submitted where we had basically compiled data from the US clinical trials, from European CE IVD marketing studies, and also from other international investigator-initiated studies, which is data from abroad that the NMPA now allows under a new guidance, which they hadn't in the past. And so with that, I think for the commercial part, that's for Ollie to answer.
Sure. Thanks, Jan, and helpful color. Well, look, similar to the US, I would expect that our partners at Beijing Clear would be in a position post-approval to launch within just a few months of receiving that NMPA approval. Any orders for Univero systems can be fulfilled immediately since we have strategic inventory, and I refer everybody to our 10Q and 10K filings and the OpGen balance sheet. Manufacturing a larger lot of NMPA-approved pneumonia cartridges would likely take about a month, all in, from start to finish, including QC release and shipping. While we do not at this point provide revenue guidance for China, the way to think about this is that this is a distribution deal at simple transfer prices. We would sell a system, a Univero system, at roughly $50,000 per single Univero system, and the cartridge transfer price per test are still above $100. So for each account in China that would take a single Univero system and does, say, 500 tests a year, which honestly for a large Chinese AAA hospital would be on the low side, would be about $100,000 in revenue to OpGen in that initial instance.
Thank you, Jan and Ollie. And can we review the Auris Genetics collaboration with Sandoz and the details of the new project? And how is the Auris Pharma partnering program contributing to top-line growth? And what are the partnering goals for the company over the next 12 to 24 months?
Good question. Well, obviously, we can't comment on the specifics of the Sandoz program and projects, as these are by their very nature highly confidential. But typically, we've had projects with Sandoz in the, from a short 3-month support of certain key opinion leader events and advisory boards to more involved studies taking several quarters, allowing and looking at RSDB and how that can support some of the existing generic antibiotics of Sandoz, such as, for example, fosfomycin in specific clinical indications and settings. We've already this year seen 2 additional projects with Sandoz come to fruition. One was completed successfully in the first quarter. The second project is going on right now in the Q2, and we anticipate to complete that very soon. And Auris and Sandoz were already talking about a number of additional projects as a follow-on here for the second half of 2021 and beyond. So overall, a very engaged, very fruitful collaboration. Now, we therefore stand by guidance we've previously mapped out in our earnings calls that the Sandoz deal in 2021 is anticipated to contribute a low 6-digit figure in revenue to OpGen overall. But there's certainly a strategic upside potential here for a longer, more strategic and more involved R&D collaboration, which typically you would price that based on full-time equivalents or FTEs at standard industry prices. Now, more generally speaking, and looking at the partnering strategy for Auris Genetics going forward, now that's fundamentally changed, given that we're in a much stronger financial position with our balance sheet of just shy of $40 million cash at the end of March 31st, compared to just little over $13 million at the end of 2020. Authorise will be driving and funded by OpGen the development of its RSDB platform and specific products and services, such as, for example, the recently launched isolate sequencing service or universal pathogenome assays, to a point where value generation from a strategic partnering and license deal would make it the best possible deal for OpGen at the right time. This is no longer about the fastest possible licensing deal. It's just fund some R&D. This is really, we need to be strategic about how we think about striking the right deal so that it maximizes value commercially to Authorise, strategically to OpGen, and ultimately to our OpGen shareholders. In that vein, we're constantly looking at, how do we evolve existing collaborations, such as the Sandoz deal or the QIAGEN deal, which, by the way, recently we've amended the QIAGEN deal from a worldwide exclusive license to the RSDB for research use only to a non-exclusive. Now that provides Authorise with a strategic opportunity to now also make its platform for research use only available, including the data, to other industry players and truly leverage the asset towards its global market potential. Now, we're also continuing a number of strategic conversations with several parties that have expressed specific interest in certain parts and aspects of RSDB. We're exploring specific potential deal structures that make business and economic sense for Authorise, as well as OpGen, and that help us to leverage and monetize that asset. But we're now in a position to negotiate for the right deal at the right time, take our time and continue adding value to the asset by continuing funding the R&D and delivering additional data to get to a deal that basically makes the most sense to all of OpGen shareholders.
Thank you for that, Ollie. And looking at future partnerships, do you plan to drive better, more aggressive terms to further strengthen your balance sheet?
Yeah, I mean, look, given our much stronger balance sheet that we now have due to the several successful capital raises in recent months, we're now pursuing a dual strategy of partnering on the one hand, as well as developing key assets such as the Univero A30 platform that Jan spoke to, or RSDB and Ars Genetics in our portfolio, fully funded by OpGen, while at the same time engaging and continuing the dialogue along a number of non-exclusive collaboration discussions with various parties. On the one hand, a meaningful upfront license or technology access fee would certainly provide and help with non-dilutive financing. But that becomes more likely and more attractive the more advanced the platform development and the closer to market it gets. Also, by showing our partners that we're able and willing to co-fund and invest in the further development steps and take it through the final stages of product and platform developments closer towards commercial launch in a truly collaborative manner, may also allow to either strike a co-marketing or co-promotion deal, or carve out certain indications or territories for OpGen. And of course, we want to maximize the royalty in any future license deal. Now, in those licensing deals, we would participate in the net revenue stream that our licensees, our partners, would generate. From my experience, and I've been negotiating licensing agreements in molecular diagnostics for over 23 years, those terms and percentage rates of royalties usually increase significantly. The more advanced, the more mature your asset and platform becomes. And the later a licensing deal gets signed, the more attractive these terms of such a commercial strategic licensing deal becomes.
Thank you. And what is the status of discussions with IVD players to license RSDB?
Obviously cannot comment on any specifics here, as these discussions and negotiations are strictly confidential. However, there is certainly more clarity on certain specific aspects around scope of potential deals, as well as potential deal structures. However, at this point, it would simply be premature to speculate as to either the identity of some of these parties, the nature of a specific deal, or specific timelines. We'll provide those updates as they become real.
And what are the prospects for the New York State initiative being renewed past September 30th, 2021? And how is this collaboration attributed to top line growth?
Good question. Look, when we as OpGen originally entered into the New York State Department of Health project in 2019, it was designed to develop a platform for rapid infection prevention and outbreak tracing, tracking and monitoring based on the proprietary OpGen Acutus AMR gene panel for isolates and our Acutus Lighthouse bioinformatics suite and cloud-based solution. Year 2, which started on April 1st, 2020, was designed to deliver the data and the testing volume to allow the New York State Department of Health to assess the impact and how to best think about a statewide rollout. Due to COVID, testing was suspended for several months, but we've since late fall seen a significant uptick in testing volumes across all sites. Indeed, a couple of additional hospitals and sites have recently been added into the program. The 6-month extension and expansion, which we expect to add up to $540,000 to 2021 top-line revenue for OpGen, gives us the time to jointly evaluate all the data and discuss the potential pathways forward into a year 3 and beyond. We've discussions ongoing not only with the New York State Department of Health at the Wadsworth Center, but with all of the clinical labs and sites individually. As we anticipate obtaining FDA clearance for the Acutus AMR gene panel for isolates in due course, as outlined earlier, we would imagine talking to all of these sites about a potential migration or shift from an RUO kit over to the FDA cleared. So a logical way to think about any year 3 and beyond is really multiple components. First, moving from RUO over to the FDA cleared IVD kit. Second, adding additional hospitals and labs across the state of New York. And thirdly, fundamentally, if it works in the state of New York, there's no reason why it couldn't and shouldn't work in other states across the US as well.
Thank you for that, Oliver. And can you review the cash runway and how you plan to fund the company long-term?
Sure, I'll take that. I'll answer first the runway and then talk about funding the company. In terms of the runway, as we mentioned, $40 million in cash at the end of Q1 with our burn rate between 5 and 6. That gives us essentially 2 years runway right now. But having said that, we do have our first tranche debt payment due to EIB next April. At the current exchange rate, it's roughly about $16 million, which could reduce that burn rate or that cash burn rate by 3/4 if we don't get the share increase. In terms of funding the company, as Oliver just mentioned, there's partnership arrangements, licensing deals. We do have access to roughly $27 to $28 million if the warrants are exercised. And we also anticipate approval of proposal 2 so that we will have additional shares to be able to sell at the right time, at the right point to make sure the company is funded going forward.
Thank you for that, Tim. And looking into the second half of 2021, are you expecting growth from product sales and collaboration revenue? And what will the breakdown look like?
Similar question. I'll just reiterate that obviously we're not providing specific revenue guidance at this point due to all of the aspects surrounding COVID and its ongoing effects on us as well as our partners. However, as talked about, we anticipate regulatory approvals in China. We have other geographies such as Vietnam and Colombia also adding to growth. So of course, we do anticipate revenue growth from our core products business, primarily from the uptake of Univero products here in the United States, the Univero lower respiratory tract or LRTBAL, as well as the urinary tract infection, which we're already commercializing as RUO in 2021 and beyond. Also, of course, the FDA clearance of the Acutus AMR gene panel for isolates would help get this into the hands of multiple additional sites and potential customers. So of course, we'll also add to top-line revenue growth as we move forward. Key catalyst on this, and we talked about China, that's key because for an 8-year period following Chinese approval, there is an exclusivity that is tied and subject to an already signed deal, a minimum of 360 Univero systems, as well as 1.5 million Univero cartridges cumulatively over an 8-year period, which adds up to approximately $180 million in today's exchange rates. So we anticipate growing the products business on Univero. We anticipate growing the Acutus business, and of course the Iris Genetics business based on services and solutions, as well as potential strategic partnering deals. Revenue recognition from any partnering or licensing deal, whether it's for Iris Genetics and or the Univero A30, is a bit tougher to project. You may, strike a deal. If you strike that hypothetically, towards the back end of the fourth quarter of this year, it may have a significant upfront licensing fee, but revenue recognition under US GAAP revenue recognition rules would have to be stretched out over the number of years for the license or the underlying intellectual property. And therefore, the actual fiscal 2021 revenue recognition might only be a small portion of that. But overall, we're obviously excited about the revenue growth potential of our core products business. And that's what we're going to be focusing on driving forward here in the next couple of quarters.
Really appreciate that, Ollie. And is there a plan regarding insider purchases?
I've heard that one a number of times. And I wish, look, there is no dedicated plan in place. That said, both Jan Bacher and myself, we've been looking for over a year on a possible trading window during which we could legitimately buy OpGen shares in the open market. Both of us, over the past 10 plus years, have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into Curetis, and we're firm believers in the business combination and the combined strategic OpGen, Curetis, and Iris story. At OpGen, we routinely have blackout periods beginning at least 2 weeks prior to the end of a quarter until such time that either the 10Q or 10K are published. Plus, of course, any other material non-public information that we might have. So this was literally the first time in over a year where we had the clearance from legal and compliance upfront several days in advance to be able and allowed to buy shares in the open market. Both of us had long beforehand committed to buying a certain number of shares regardless of share price. Fact of the matter is that, of course, none of us had any insider information, as otherwise we would not have been allowed to trade in the stock. It's also clear that neither of us have any interest here in short-term trading. By way of example, I held all of my shares in my previous company, Epigenomics, which I co-founded, for 13 years that I was their chief financial officer. And in fact, I held them for multiple years after I left and already joined Curetis. It wasn't until there was a public takeover offer for Epigenomics that I decided to sell all of my shares. The entire board, as well as the executive committee and leadership team, have significant incentives on the equity side, whether it's via stock options, which vest over a 4-year period, as well as options and RSUs vesting over a 2-year period. Safe to say that our interests are truly aligned with the interests of our shareholders, and we want to see value appreciation and shareholder value being generated. Look, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've co-founded 8+ companies over the last 23 years. I've never viewed myself as an employed manager or hired gun, optimizing for cash compensation. I've always made sure that my own upside and my own incentives are genuinely based in equity long-term incentives and aligned with our shareholders.
Thank you, Ollie. And assuming FDA approval happens, is OpGen open to a potential buyout, or is OpGen only looking forward to building the company and selling products and or licensing deals?
Oh, another very good question. Look, I mean, if you look at this space, the space of rapid molecular diagnostics platforms, specifically in infectious disease, and you just look at the last 4 or 5 months in 2021, you look at M&A deals such as Roche's acquisition of Genmark, DiaSorin's acquisition of Luminex, Hologic's acquisition of Mobidiac, a Finnish-French platform company with a platform not too dissimilar of our A30 for $800 million, as well as Thermo Fisher's recent acquisition of Mesa Biotech, another small platform for about $500 million. It's safe to say that any molecular diagnostics company ultimately is always looking at an exit strategy that is more likely than not going to result in a strategic M&A deal. It is, however, my experience that good companies and good platforms get bought, not sold. So our focus is on executing on the key milestones and deliverables, be they FDA approvals, Chinese approvals, commercial product launches, strategic partnering deals. But in the process, as a public company, any public company is for sale every single day of the year, as well the board, as well as our entire executive team, Tim, Jan, myself. Look, if there is shareholder value to be generated through a deal that makes strategic sense, we're definitely going to be open to that if and when it presents itself. So our focus is on delivering on the fundamentals, because we believe that ultimately will maximize shareholder value and will maximize the opportunities for a really value creating strategic exit opportunity down the road.
Thanks for that, Oliver. And thank you, Jan and Tim. This is all the time that we have for today. Thank you everyone for submitting these questions, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to join this call. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to us directly. Our email address and telephone numbers are listed in this presentation and on every OpGen press release, and we'll be happy to speak with anyone with additional queries. Thanks again, everyone.